Robert Downey Jr. walked into the crowded talent show auditorium, blending into the background like an ordinary guy. No one turned their head to notice him. His plain brown jacket, jeans, and baseball cap made him look more like someone stopping by on their lunch break than a Hollywood legend. There were no cameras, no fans, and no entourage. He moved quietly, his steps slow and purposeful. But tonight wasn't just another night. He had come for something specific, and in a few hours, everyone in this room would be talking about him. Across the room, the buzz of conversation grew louder. Contestants were pacing nervously, adjusting their outfits and going over their lines. Judges were settling into their seats, flipping through their notes, and then cutting through the noise came a booming voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to witness greatness!" Trevor's voice carried across the room as he made his entrance. He was a talent agent with a big ego to match his loud personality. His suit was bright blue, his watch glinted gold under the lights, and his slicked-back hair looked so polished it could almost reflect the room. Trevor held a glass of sparkling water in one hand and waved dramatically with the other. "I've discovered the next big thing. Mark my words. Tonight will be the start of a new star's career." People turned their heads to watch him. He loved the attention and soaked it up like a sponge. "Where's my girl?" he barked at his assistant, who scrambled nervously to respond. "She's warming up, Trevor." "Everything's ready," the assistant replied, clutching a clipboard and avoiding eye contact. Trevor nodded with a grin. "Good, because when she steps on that stage, everyone here is going to know who's got the real eye for talent." As Trevor scanned the room, his gaze landed on Robert, sitting quietly in the corner. At first, Trevor didn't recognize him. He squinted, trying to place the face. Then, he leaned toward his assistant and spoke just loud enough for others nearby to hear. "Who let that guy in? He looks like someone who should be working backstage, not sitting here," Trevor said with a smirk. His assistant hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I mean, come on," Trevor continued, his voice dripping with arrogance. "That guy's no one important. Probably just another washed-up actor who's trying to cling to fame." Robert heard every word, but his face didn't change. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and smiled slightly. He wasn't bothered by the comment, but others around him started whispering. Who was this man? Why wasn't he reacting? Trevor's loud comments drew even more attention as he clapped his assistant on the shoulder. "Stick with me, kid," he said with a laugh. "You'll learn how to spot the real players in this business." As Trevor turned away, Robert remained calm. He wasn't there to defend himself or prove Trevor wrong, not yet anyway. But what Trevor didn't know was that Robert wasn't just another face in the crowd. He wasn't some nobody who had wandered in by accident. This was Robert Downey Jr., one of the biggest names in Hollywood. And he wasn't just here to watch. He was here for a reason that would leave Trevor and everyone else completely speechless. Before we dive into what happens next, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from? Are you in a big city like Los Angeles or New York? Or maybe you're in a small town or even another country. Let me know in the comments below. And don't go anywhere, because this story is about to take a shocking turn. Robert Downey Jr. stayed seated in the corner, calm and quiet, as the bustling talent show carried on around him. While others chatted, laughed, or scrolled through their phones, he seemed at ease, watching the stage with a soft smile. It was as if he was invisible, or perhaps he wanted to be. Meanwhile, Trevor was still the loudest voice in the room. He strutted around like he owned the place, shaking hands with judges, patting contestants on the back and making sure everyone noticed him. "Big night for me," he told anyone who would listen. "My singer is going to steal the show, no doubt about it. She's the real deal." Robert glanced over at Trevor once or twice, but didn't say a word. Trevor, on the other hand, couldn't resist taking another jab at him. As he passed by Robert's seat, Trevor stopped, pretending to examine the man as if trying to figure out where he'd seen him before. "Hey, pal," Trevor said with a fake smile. "You waiting for someone? Or are you part of the cleanup crew?" Robert chuckled softly, looking up at Trevor. "Just here to watch the talent," he said in a calm, even tone. "Oh, watching, huh? Well, let me give you some advice," Trevor said, sitting down uninvited in the seat next to him. "In this business, you've got to stand out. You've got to make a name for yourself. If you're too quiet, people will just overlook you." Robert nodded politely. "That's good advice," he said, though his smile hinted that he knew more than he was letting on. Trevor leaned back, clearly pleased with himself for helping this quiet man. But then, one of the show organizers approached Robert with a clipboard. "Mr. Downey, we're ready for you to take your seat at the judges' table," the organizer said with a warm smile. The room seemed to pause for a moment. Trevor's confident grin faded, replaced by confusion. "Judges' table," he repeated. "Yes," the organizer replied. "Robert Downey Jr. is one of our special guest judges tonight." Trevor blinked, stunned. He glanced at Robert, who stood up slowly, adjusting his jacket. The other contestants and judges started to notice, whispering to each other as they realized who had been sitting in their midst the entire time. Trevor scrambled to recover. "Oh, of course! I knew that! I didn't recognize you out of costume, you know? Big fan of your work, Mr. Downey," he stammered, holding out his hand. Robert shook it politely, but didn't say much. His calm demeanor hadn't changed, but now the balance of power in the room had shifted. People who had ignored him earlier were now sneaking glances, whispering his name, and pointing in his direction. As Robert walked toward the judges' table, Trevor stayed frozen in place, his confident act cracking under the weight of embarrassment. His assistant leaned over and whispered, maybe you shouldn't have said all that stuff earlier." Trevor scowled, trying to brush it off. "It's fine. He probably didn't hear me. And even if he did, it's not like he cares." But deep down, Trevor felt the sting of being caught underestimating someone. Robert took his place at the judges' table, greeting the other panelists with his signature warmth and humility. He didn't seem fazed by the earlier comments or the sudden shift in attention. To him, this was just another night. But for Trevor, the night had already started to spiral out of his control. And as the first performers took the stage, Trevor couldn't help but glance nervously at the judges' table, wondering what Robert Downey Jr. would do next. The first act of the night stepped onto the stage, a young guitarist, barely 16 years old, with trembling hands gripping his instrument. The room quieted as the spotlight hit him, and the soft hum of anticipation filled the air. Robert Downey Jr. sat at the judges' table, leaning forward slightly, his expression calm and encouraging. Trevor, now seated a few rows back, kept glancing at Robert nervously. His earlier confidence had been replaced with a strange mix of irritation and unease. He whispered to his assistant, "He's just an actor. What does he know about talent?" The assistant, unsure how to respond, muttered, "Maybe you should just focus on your singer, Trevor." The young guitarist played his heart out. His fingers danced over the strings, and his voice, though shaky at first, grew stronger with each verse. By the time he finished, the room erupted in applause. Robert clapped softly, a small smile on his face, while the other judges scribbled notes on their cards. When the host invited the judges to comment, Robert spoke up. "You've got a gift," he said to the boy, his voice steady and warm. "But more importantly, you've got heart. Don't ever lose that." The boy's face lit up, and the audience applauded again. Trevor, sitting in the back, rolled his eyes. "What a cliché," he muttered under his breath. As the night went on, the talent ranged from incredible to less so. There were singers who forgot their lyrics, dancers who tripped over their own feet, and even a magician who accidentally revealed the secret to his trick. Through it all, Robert remained patient and kind, offering constructive feedback that made the contestants feel seen and valued. Trevor, meanwhile, was growing more agitated. His singer, a confident young woman named Kelly, was scheduled to perform near the end of the night, and Trevor was determined that she would steal the show. He kept bragging to anyone who would listen. "Just wait until Kelly gets up there. She's going to blow everyone away. I guarantee it." Finally, Kelly's name was announced. She stepped onto the stage wearing a sparkling dress, her head held high. The audience clapped politely, and Trevor leaned back in his seat with a smug grin. Kelly's voice was powerful, no doubt about it. She hit every note perfectly, and her stage presence was undeniable. But as she sang, something felt off. The performance was flawless, yes, but it lacked the emotional connection that had made some of the earlier acts so memorable. When Kelly finished, the room applauded, but it wasn't the thunderous ovation Trevor had been expecting. He frowned, his confidence starting to waver. "They just don't get it," he muttered to his assistant. The judges took their turns giving feedback. Some praised Kelly's technical skill, while others gently suggested she work on bringing more emotion to her performances. Then it was Robert's turn. He looked at Kelly thoughtfully, his tone kind but honest. "You've got a great voice," he said, "and it's clear you've worked hard to get here. But I'd like to see more of you in the performance. Tell us your story. Let the audience feel what you're feeling." Kelly nodded, her face thoughtful, but Trevor was fuming. He leaned forward, his voice rising as he addressed the judges' table. "Excuse me, but with all due respect, Kelly doesn't need to prove anything. She's already better than most of the acts tonight." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Trevor. Robert didn't respond right away. He stayed calm, his gaze steady as he looked at the flustered talent agent. "Talent isn't just about being the best," Robert said softly, his voice carrying across the room. "It's about connecting with people. That's what makes someone unforgettable." Trevor opened his mouth to argue, but stopped himself. There was something about the way Robert spoke, calm, sure, and genuine, that made it impossible to dismiss. The audience murmured in agreement, some nodding, others clapping lightly. Trevor slumped back in his seat, his confidence shaken. For the first time that night, he didn't have a quick comeback or a smug remark. As the next act was called to the stage, Trevor's frustration grew. He wasn't used to being overshadowed, especially not by someone as humble and understated as Robert Downey Jr. But the night wasn't over yet, and Trevor was determined to find a way to regain control of the room. The final act of the night was announced, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. A young woman named Sarah stepped onto the stage, clutching an old acoustic guitar. She looked nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the strap over her shoulder. Her outfit was simple, jeans and a plain blouse, and her presence was quiet compared to the glitz and confidence of some of the earlier performers. Trevor let out a low chuckle. "Oh, great," he whispered to his assistant. "Another one of these diamond-in-the-rough types. Bet she can't hold a candle to Kelly." The assistant didn't respond, glancing nervously between Trevor and Robert at the judges' table. Trevor's dismissive attitude had worn thin over the night, and it was clear that the audience was no longer on his side. Sarah took a deep breath and strummed the first chord. Her voice, soft at first, carried through the room like a whisper that demanded to be heard. Each note was raw and heartfelt, and as she sang, the lyrics told a story of loss, resilience, and hope. Her words painted a picture of someone who had struggled but never given up, and her vulnerability struck a chord with everyone in the audience. The room fell silent, captivated by her performance. Even Trevor stopped fidgeting, his smug expression melting into something that looked almost like curiosity. When Sarah hit the final note, the silence lingered for a moment, before the audience erupted into applause. Robert stood and clapped, a warm smile on his face. The other judges followed, clearly moved by what they had just witnessed. Sarah looked overwhelmed, tears in her eyes as she bowed and stepped off the stage. The host took the mic and addressed the audience. Now, before we reveal tonight's winner, we'd like to invite our special guest judge, Robert Downey Jr., to say a few words. The room buzzed with excitement as Robert stood, the spotlight now squarely on him. He walked to the center of the stage, his usual calm demeanor intact. "First of all," Robert began, "thank you to everyone who performed tonight. It takes courage to put yourself out there, to share your gifts with the world. And whether you win or not, remember this: your talent has value, and your story matters." The crowd applauded, but Robert wasn't finished. He turned to Sarah, who was still standing near the edge of the stage. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady and kind, "your performance tonight reminded me of why I fell in love with storytelling in the first place. It's not about perfection or flash. It's about heart, and you have so much of it." The room erupted in applause again, and Sarah covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Trevor, sitting stiffly in the audience, felt his face burn. He had spent the entire night trying to prove that flashy performances and big egos were what mattered most. But here was Robert Downey Jr., reminding everyone that the greatest impact comes from authenticity and heart. But then Robert did something no one expected. He turned toward the audience, his gaze falling directly on Trevor. "There's one more thing I want to say," Robert continued. "Sometimes we get so caught up in trying to be the loudest voice in the room that we forget to listen. But the truth is, the real stars don't need to shout. They let their light shine through their actions, their kindness, and their willingness to lift others up." Trevor's eyes widened as he realized Robert's words were meant for him. The audience murmured, some glancing in Trevor's direction. He sank lower in his seat, feeling the weight of the moment. Robert smiled gently, breaking the tension. "Thank you all for letting me be part of this night," he said, stepping back from the mic. The host returned to the stage to announce the winner, but the moment was clear. Robert Downey Jr. had already made the biggest impact of the night. The auditorium buzzed with energy after Robert Downey Jr.'s heartfelt speech. While the host announced the winner, Sarah, to no one's surprise, Trevor sat frozen in his seat. Applause erupted around him as Sarah accepted her trophy, tears streaming down her face. She thanked the judges and the audience, but it was clear her heart was still on Robert's words. Trevor's assistant leaned over, whispering, "Maybe you should go congratulate her. It might help." Trevor hesitated, his pride wrestling with the sting of being called out, indirectly yet unmistakably. He glanced toward the stage where Sarah stood, glowing with humility and joy. Then his eyes moved to Robert, who had returned to his seat, clapping politely and smiling as if nothing unusual had happened. For a moment, Trevor felt anger bubbling up again. Who was Robert Downey Jr. to lecture him? Sure, he was a big, starry. But what did he know about the struggles of talent agents trying to break into the industry? But as the applause died down and the room began to clear out, Trevor couldn't shake a nagging thought. Maybe Robert had a point. As the crowd filtered toward the exits, Trevor found himself walking toward the stage almost without realizing it. He wasn't sure what he was going to say or do, but he felt an urge to talk to Robert. Robert was still seated, chatting with one of the other judges. When Trevor approached, Robert looked up, his expression open and kind. "Hey," Trevor said awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. I just wanted to say you were right about everything." Robert tilted his head slightly, his expression curious but patient. "I mean, I was so focused on showing off tonight, trying to prove something that I forgot what this was really about," Trevor admitted. "It's not about me. It's about them, the people on that stage." Robert smiled. "Takes a lot of courage to admit that," he said. "Most people never do." Trevor let out a small, nervous laugh. "Yeah, well, I'm learning the hard way." Robert stood and extended his hand. Trevor hesitated for a moment, then shook it firmly. "Here's the thing," Robert said, his tone calm and steady. "Talent and success are great, but they're not the whole story. What really matters is how you use them, whether you're lifting others up or just lifting yourself higher." Trevor nodded slowly, the words sinking in deeper than he expected. As they spoke, Sarah approached, still holding her trophy. Her eyes lit up when she saw Robert and Trevor together. "Mr. Downey," she said shyly, "thank you so much for what you said tonight. It means the world to me." Robert turned to her with a warm smile. "You earned it, Sarah. Keep telling your story and don't let anyone dim your light." Sarah nodded, then glanced at Trevor, her expression softening. "And thank you too, Mr. Trevor, for bringing me here tonight. It was a dream come true." Trevor blinked, surprised by her gratitude. He managed a small smile. "You're the one with the talent, Sarah. I just gave you the stage." As Sarah walked away to join her family, Trevor stood there in silence for a moment. Robert placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's never too late to change how you show up in the world," he said simply. Trevor nodded, feeling something shift inside him. It wasn't an instant transformation. His ego was still there, whispering doubts, but for the first time, he felt the weight of his own behavior, and for the first time, he wanted to do better. As the night ended and the crowd thinned out, Trevor left the auditorium with a lot to think about. He wasn't sure where to start, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't forget Robert Downey Jr.'s words anytime soon. Meanwhile, Robert walked out into the cool night air, unnoticed once again as he slipped into the city's quiet streets. For him, it wasn't about the applause or recognition. It was about planting seeds of change, one conversation at a time. As the night came to a close, the auditorium lights dimmed, and the crowd filtered out into the quiet streets of downtown LA. The energy of the talent show still lingered in the air, but for some, the impact of the night would last far longer. Trevor walked to his car, deep in thought. The words Robert Downey Jr. had spoken played over and over in his mind. Talent and success are great, but they're not the whole story. What really matters is how you use them, whether you're lifting others up or just lifting yourself higher. Trevor glanced at his assistant, who was scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of the inner shift happening within him. For the first time in a long time, Trevor felt humbled. Maybe he'd spent too many years chasing applause and not enough time listening to the people around him. Meanwhile, Robert Downey Jr. walked out of the venue quietly, blending back into the city's rhythm as if he had never been there. He didn't need cameras or fanfare. His impact wasn't about being noticed. It was about sparking change. But the story doesn't end here. What about you? Have you ever judged someone too quickly, like Trevor? Or maybe, like Sarah, you felt overlooked and unsure if your talent was enough. This story is a reminder for all of us. The way we treat others says more about who we are than what we achieve. So, what will you do with the gifts you've been given? Will you lift others up or keep the spotlight on yourself? Take a moment to think about it. And if this story spoke to you, let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from? Have you ever had a moment that changed how you see yourself or others? Share your thoughts and connect with others who feel the same. If this message resonated, don't forget to share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose life you might touch. And if you want more stories like this, hit the like button and subscribe for more. Remember, the smallest acts of kindness can have the biggest impact. The night might be over, but the lessons live on. It's your turn to step onto life's stage and make a difference.